Good evening. It's good to see all of you here this evening to hear Tatewin Means speak. We're excited to have her as our Stark lecturer this year. We've had a great day so far with Tatewin. She's here at 11. And then we had a really nice lunch. About 20 people came, and we had lunch together with Tatewin and with Deborah, her personal coordinator. Bodyguard, that's right. That's right. We're glad you're here. So we've just had a good day so far, and it's been great to have Tatewin here with us. Today it's a privilege to introduce our distinguished guest, Tatewin Means, Executive Director of the Thunder Valley Development Corporation. I want to talk about the Stark Lectureship just a little bit. I try to do this every year so people are aware of what the Stark Lectureship is all about. The Stark Lectureship was established in 1959. I mean, it's been around a while. It's older than I am, by Franklin Stark, dedicated alumnus of our institution, and it's constantly sought to fulfill a noble mission by recognizing people who demonstrate by the authenticity of their own lives, the connection today between faith and works. Over the past 6 decades, this platform has showcased a remarkable array of thought leaders and individuals who have profoundly impacted the intersection of faith, ethics, and society. So the Stark Lectureship is all about exploring or hearing from people who are creatively using the resources of faith to be engaged in making our world a better place. And so in this case, it's Tatewin's Lakota spirituality and the way that that's intersecting in the community development work that she's all about. So our previous Stark lectures include theologian Elton Trueblood, humanitarian Naomi Tutu, Senator Mark Hatfield, who was good friends with George McGovern and worked on anti-Vietnam War legislation together. The renowned columnist Cal Thomas, and the acclaimed writer Donald Miller. Many of you may have read Blue Like Jazz, a book everybody was reading a few years back. And, of course, the good senator and humanitarian George McGovern, who out of all the above was the only McGovern Stark lecturer who gave 2 lectures 2 different years. So George McGovern is, and another that I'd like to mention is Rabbi Pesach Wolicki. Pesach is just the strangest name. It means Passover. And I commented to him one time when he was here. I said, "Your name is like Passover." What? And he goes, "Yeah, it's weird in Hebrew too." He says, "It's not like in Israel other people are named Passover." He said, "I don't know what was with my dad, but he named me Passover." So Tatewin Means is from the Sisseton Wahpeton Dakota, Oglala Lakota and the Inhanktonwan nations of South Dakota. In 2015, Tatewin was sworn in as a Deputy Senate's Attorney for the Oglala Lakota County and a German Marshall Fund Marshall Memorial Fellow. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree from Stanford University in Environmental Engineering with a minor in Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity, a Master of Arts degree from Oglala Lakota College in Lakota Leadership and Management, and a Doctor of Jurisprudence degree with a concentration in Human Rights Law from the University of Minnesota Law School. An impressive set of academic credentials there. Tatewin joined the Thunder Valley as the Executive Director in 2018, and now she's going to, before she comes, actually, we're going to watch a short video that Tatewin was nominated as one of the remarkable women of South Dakota, and Kellan put together a little video that we're going to watch. So please help me welcome Tatewin Means. Thank you. Okay. That's all.
Okay. Hamidakia pi iuha chante washtiana pechuza pi tatuye dopanajiwi imachia pi Sisseton Wahpeton Dakota na Oglala Lakota na Inhanktonwan Dakota wia hemacha Oglala makoche emataha. Greetings, relatives. I shake each of your hands with a good heart. My full name is actually Tatewin Means, which means the woman that stands with the 4 directions. It was my paternal grandmother's name, and she wanted me to have it as I made my journey through life so that she would never be forgotten. and it is my actual legal name. So it got shortened to Tatewin, and so that's what I'm more commonly known as. But yes, on all my ACTs and college applications, I was filling in 75 bubbles to start the process. But all jokes aside, I'm very proud and honored to carry that name on behalf of my grandmother, and to have to be a part of a change in movement where you see a lot more of our community members carrying our Lakota, our Dakota names as our names rather than English names. And so that is who I am. I grew up on my father's homelands. My father's the late Russell Means, and he's Oglala Lakota and Inhanktonwan Dakota. So I grew up in Kyle, South Dakota, a small community in the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. I went to Little Wound School, and I'm very proud of the fact that I went to a tribal school as my educational foundation, and it's what set me in the right direction as far as feeling that safety and comfortability with who I am as a Lakota person, as a Lakota woman, as I made my various educational endeavors, as was mentioned in my bio. So the 2 times that I left home was to go to school, always with the intention of coming back home to my people, to my homelands, to make some kind of impact. Prior to my time at Thunder Valley, I was the Attorney General of the Oglala Sioux Tribe. It was a political appointment, and I survived the full political appointment. There's 2 things I said in law school that I never wanted to do. I never wanted to work for a tribal government, and I never wanted to be a prosecutor. So what was my first job? Working for a tribal government as the chief prosecutor for the nation. And so it just goes to show that Creator always has a plan for you. Regardless of where you might think you're meant to be, there's a way that you're exactly where you're supposed to. And so, I learned a lot in my time in that system, in that Western criminal justice system. And it was there that I really understood the need for truly grassroots effort, community-based efforts, like what was happening at Thunder Valley. I'd always been aware of the work at Thunder Valley. I was always a supporter, and was on the board for some time, served as outside legal counsel for a year or so, and then the opportunity came to join more formally in the position that I have now in 2018. And so I've been with Thunder Valley since 2018, and really understanding the need for transformational change that comes from community. It's hard to make change within institutions, and especially within institutions that are not designed for our livelihood, that are not designed for our success or our prosperity. And so understanding that from my time there really means a lot, and it has shaped some of the hopes and visions that I have as we move this work forward at Thunder Valley. So I just want to thank you for the invitation to come and to join your community here on this campus and to share a bit of our work and our story at Thunder Valley. So Thunder Valley is it's spiritually based. Our vision and who we are and the work that we do is connected to prayer. It's connected to our spirituality as Lakota people. And this idea of doing this work came from ceremony. One of our 7 sacred ceremonies, our 7 sacred rites, is the Anipi, which is a sweat lodge ceremony. And it was at this time, long before Thunder Valley formed as an organization, that there was a group of young people in their early 20s, just getting started in their careers, just getting started with their families, really restless and hungry for change. They are tired of seeing the same things, the repeated cycles, the same broken promises from subsequent tribal governments, federal governments, all of these things that are just recurring in our communities. They were tired of the despair and the hopelessness. And so in that ceremony, it was really a call to action. A mirror was put before them and asked them, are you not warriors? How long are you going to let others decide the future of your children? And one of the other guiding principles that was given to them at that time was, no matter what you do, always come from a place of hope, not fear. A lot of times when we do this work, and especially in the social justice and racial justice fields, it's prompted and motivated out of fear, a fear of the unknown, of what's going to happen. And you can't be posited in the deficit narrative or in that deficit framework. You have to really fight and advocate for that shift in mindset and that shift in narrative to be forward thinking and to remain rooted in hope and hopefulness. And so, you know, with that direction and with that guidance, it wasn't like the next day they signed their articles of incorporation and voila, we became a nonprofit. It was much more gradual, it was much more organic. But the one thing that they did know and realize at that time is we have to connect our young people to our way of life as Lakota people. And our language is Lako Wichocha, which is Lakota lifeways. It's not a religion, it's not something you practice, it's a whole way of life. It's a whole way of thinking, of treating and developing relationships with one another, and how we care for non-human relatives, our animal relatives, the earth, everything that has life here on this planet. And so, having that worldview, that Lakota worldview and mindset, we understood that connecting our young people to that is so important to ensure our livelihood for generations to come. It is what helped those young people be who they were. It is what's helped guide me throughout my life. I was very fortunate to be raised, immersed in our Lakota spirituality and our lifeways, and it's made me who I am. It's defined my very existence as a Lakota person, as an Indigenous woman, and as someone that advocates for change in our community. And so they set out to serve youth. Thunder Valley has always been a youth-serving organization. Our youth are our focus. And they started to do different community events and activities. When I came on in 2018, we sat down collectively as an entire organization and said, where are we going with this work? We've always had this mission of empowering our Lakota youth and families. We wanted to improve the health, the culture of our communities. And we knew that we could do that through the healing and the strengthening of our cultural identity. So healing has always been fundamental to our work. But where was it taking us? Where was this mission of reaching our youth and families and making these reconnections? Where was it going? And this is where we came up with our vision statement, that we envision a liberated Lakota nation through a return to our lifeways, our language, and our spirituality. And so what does this liberation mean? You hear that word a lot nowadays, especially in racial justice circles, to find liberation, to find freedom. We come from a long line of freedom fighters. Me particularly, you know, my father being who he was, but all of the ancestors that came before him, what they lived and fought and died for to ensure that I'm able to stand here today, to speak my language, to know our ceremonies and our songs, and to be able to share this history with you all. That's exactly what they stood for. And so it's a long line of freedom fighters, of patriots that we come from. And it's now for our generation and the ones to follow to really define what that freedom looks like for us. What does liberation mean? What does it feel like? What does it taste like? What does it smell like? How does it make us feel? And so the one thing that we do know at Thunder Valley is it has to start with healing. We cannot be free, as mentioned in that video, from all of these traumas and the history, the traumatic history that has engulfed our people and our communities. We cannot be free if we are still holding on to those, if we have not healed and moved forward in a positive way. So how do we create a collective healing movement as a nonprofit organization, as a collection of community members that is going to inspire lasting and real change in our communities? That's the challenge that's placed before us. And so as we do this work, we think about our next generations, just as our ancestors did for us. They loved us enough to ensure our continued existence. And they did that in spite of all of the atrocities that were happening to them, in spite of the genocide that they were experiencing and the traumas. And when I talk about the work that we do at Thunder Valley, or when I just speak about our community in general, it's important to acknowledge that history, however hard it may be to acknowledge that history. It's important that it's recognized and that we're able to have that collective understanding of what the Indigenous peoples of this land have endured to continue to exist as distinct peoples. You know, it's rather frustrating, it's a bit dehumanizing, and it's sad to be able to travel to different parts of this country, of what is now called the United States, and learn so deeply about the history of many other groups of people. Important history that we should know. But there's never any mention of what has happened to the Indigenous peoples here, besides a few paragraphs around Thanksgiving that you might have learned in grade school, or, you know, Columbus's great voyages to discover new land, you know, those kinds of things. And so learning Indigenous people's history is absolutely fundamental to the healing that this nation needs to have, to the reckoning that this nation needs. You want racial justice? You want racial reckoning? It has to start with the original sin of this country, and that's what has been done to the Indigenous peoples. When you think about numbers, it varies. Between 50 million to 150 million Indigenous people died as a part of the genocide that happened right here on this land. But we don't see that. We don't hear about it. We don't learn about it. And so when you think about that history, and you think about from the very the doctrine of discovery, the papal bulls that were issued by the Catholic Church in this colonial period from the point of first contact, where they actually issued a decree to colonize, convert, and enslave the Indigenous peoples of this land in order to acquire land and resources. That was the intentionality behind the church in its interaction with Indigenous peoples. So our relationship with the church as an institution is very traumatic as Indigenous people, because later, as we go through the reservation era and the assimilation era, you introduce boarding schools from the Catholic Church and the United States government, which the very intention was to kill the Indian, save the man. Beaten for speaking our language, outlawed. Our lifeways, our language were outlawed until you get to the self-determination era, where up until 1978, it was illegal to be Lakota. It was illegal to speak our language. It wasn't until the passage of the American Indian Religious Freedom Act in 1978 where the government finally said, we recognize you as a distinct people, and it's okay for you to speak your language and to practice your way of life. You have our permission to do so now. You have the Indian Child Welfare Act that was passed in 1973. You know, all a product of the sacrifice that was made during the Civil Rights Movement. American Indian people were very much a part of that era of racial and social justice in the United States. And a lot of that legislation that came about in the self-determination era was a product of that resistance and revolution and staunch advocacy by many of our ancestors. And so you think about all of these different eras, these time periods by the church and the government that were very intentional at eliminating our existence, whether physically and actually, population-wise, or spiritually. You know, that disconnection, that targeting of our kinship systems. You know, as Indigenous people and Lakota people, our kinship relationships are really important. That intergenerational living, that connectedness to all of your relatives beyond your immediate family, all of that is so important to our identity as relatives, as good relatives. And they were very intentional at ripping that apart. Because they knew it was the heart of who we are. And so when you think about this history, it emphasizes the importance of the work that organizations like Thunder Valley and other like-minded community-based organizations do in and across Indian country, because it's all of this intentionality, it's all of these strategies and laws and policies that we're overcoming each and every day by just existing. By doing the work that we have to do in our communities. This is what we're trying to overcome. When you look at our traditional territory, so as Oglala people, Sisseton Wahpeton Dakota, we're all a part of a greater nation called the Oceti-Sakowin, which means the 7 council fires. Different bands, there's the Tatewin band, which the Oglalas and the Dakotas all come from. The tan area is our traditional territory. What you see in the pink areas now are what the current reservations are in South Dakota. So we had a large, expansive territory prior to colonization, and we know with the intentionality behind some of those policy eras, the goal was to access land, to own land, to acquire land, and the resources that were there. So treaties are signed, treaties are violated, because why? Resources were discovered, as was the case in the Black Hills with gold. Okay, so what we see now are the 9 reservations that are in South Dakota. We are located right in the heart of the Pine Ridge Reservation. We're one of the largest land-based tribes in the United States, but for South Dakota as well. So at Thunder Valley, as I mentioned, we understand that healing has to be central to our fight for liberation and freedom. And so we've developed this liberation model to really describe and depict our work. I mentioned this morning that we're blessed to have a lot of artists. As Lakota people in general, we have a lot of beautiful artisans. I am not one of them. And so we have several on staff, though, that are able to really encapsulate the feeling and the essence of what we're trying to do in imagery. And so this is something one of our staff members, Mary LeBeau, created as a part of sharing what our liberation approach is. The roots of the work is always connected to our community. Oyate means people. We come from the Pate Oyate, the Buffalo Nation. They are our relatives, our oldest relatives, and it's who we are. It's that rooted connectedness to who we are originally and have always been. The Trunk of the Tree is a department within our organization that was launched in 2019 to really support and give structure to the work, hence it's the Trunk of the Tree. It's our lifeways and wellness equity. Our Lakota lifeways, as I said, it's fundamental to our identity, to who we are. We understand that having access to that has been a struggle. Because of those policy eras, it was very intentionally planned on how we disconnect people and keep them away from learning those lifeways and those teachings. And so we have people that grow up on the reservation their entire life and have never been to a ceremony, have never been to sweat lodge, don't speak their language. Maybe their grandmother took them at one point, but now they don't know where to go. How do I pray? You know, my mom has been a counselor. She was in the school systems for 40 years, and she would have kids come in and say they don't know how to pray. And to me, we are failing as adults, as the teachers of the next generation, if at a fundamental level our young people have lost their way and don't have that connection to prayer and belief. We have to do better. And we wonder why so many of our young people are killing themselves and we're losing them to suicide, because they have lost that connection to who we are and to our prayer and belief. We're very prayerful people. I know a lot of the old Westerns like to depict us as, all of the war parties and all those things. We're very prayerful people. And so this trunk, this structure is helping us get back to that. And it's really giving life to the rest of the work that we're able to do. So each of the branches represents each of the 8 initiatives that we have at Thunder Valley. We have our Regional Equity Initiative, which is about policy development for our tribal government, but also state and national policy. Food sovereignty, we have a 2.5-acre demonstration farm. We're launching a bison herd, so we have a bison restoration project that we're really excited about. And I don't think they're so excited about the 60 miles of fencing, bison fencing they have to do, but, I get to talk about it. So we raise chickens. We're USDA certified egg handlers, so we provide the eggs for our community, and we keep our chickens for a season before we share them with the community members. Just ensuring our poultry paddock system is healthy, that the birds are healthy, that the eggs are healthy, before we are able to share those to community. And so housing and home ownership, financial literacy, those kinds of educational outreach efforts happen a lot through that initiative. Our Lakota Language and Education Initiative is our largest initiative and employs the most people, but also it's the driving force behind our language revitalization efforts. We have 2 total immersion Montessori centers. We have a total immersion kindergarten through third grade classroom in our effort to bring back our language, to create first-generation speakers, because that was so fundamentally targeted as an assimilation tactic. We have our Youth Leadership Initiative. As I mentioned, Thunder Valley is a youth serving organization. So it's within this initiative that really is for middle school and high school age students to help build their leadership skills, their resiliency, and their advocacy as future leaders of our community. We have our Workforce Development Initiative, which is also for youth, but for 18 to 26-year-olds, into building skill sets right now in the construction industry, expanding to bison restoration to coincide with some of our work that we're doing with food sovereignty. Then we have our social enterprise, which is about building wealth in our communities, but really taking that narrative and shifting it on its head to really defining or redefining and reclaiming what Lakota wealth means. How does entrepreneurship align or not align with what wealth building means in our communities? And really pushing back on some of the more Western narratives around what being wealthy means and intergenerational wealth. So how does that look like? How does that look from a Lakota perspective? And what does that mean to build intergenerational wealth as a Lakota nation? So that's the work of that initiative. You know, just a small feat of totally redefining what economic growth means. And then the last initiative is our regenerative community development. It's probably our most known initiative just because it's the physical spaces that you see. So as mentioned, we have 34 acres of fee simple land right in the center of the Pine Ridge Reservation, and we are building a regenerative community. Regenerative, our RCD initiative, is really responsible for all of the physical spaces that we are a part of. We additionally have 48 acres of land just across the Nebraska border in White Clay, Nebraska. Some of you may have heard of it before. It was really a controversial place up until about 2017 when they lost their liquor licenses from the Nebraska Liquor Control Commission. I was a part of those hearings as the Attorney General. And it just really marked the decades of resistance that our people had in ending the liquor sales in White Clay because of all the trauma and the devastation and the death that happened in that community. So now we have 48 acres there where we're building an intentional healing community that will have permanent supportive housing, transitional housing, and all of the healing resources that our community members needs. Where are we starting with our community engagement? In our jails. We've reached out to our male and female populations in the jail, in the tribal jail facility, to ask them what healing means to them, what it looks like, and what we should include in developing this space, because it's for them that we have, that we're doing this work. So it's one of my passion projects. It really stems from the work that I saw at the Attorney General's office, the need to create these really intentional healing spaces. You can't talk about healing. You can't idealize what healing looks like. You have to actually create meaningful pathways for people to make those healing connections. So what you're looking at here, though, is our 34 acres in the middle of the reservation. And why this drawing here is important is because back in 2012, Thunder Valley had a Sustainable Communities grant. And we engaged the community in hundreds of hours of conversation around what they wanted to see in their communities. And it was the first time that our community members were asked what they wanted. So many times in Indian country and in tribal communities, it's dictated. What you see is dictated. It's told to you. It's never reflective of community voice or vision. And especially youth voice and vision. And so all of those community engagement sessions, we came back with some different designs for the 34 acres. 12 priority areas were identified. It then became the Oyate Omnichie, or the Oglala Lakota plan, which was the first ever strategic plan for the Oglala Sioux Tribe. One of those 12 priority areas was housing. At that time, Pine Ridge Reservation was deficient around 4,000 homes. So what did the first iterations look like? End-to-end housing. As many houses as you could stick in as possible, piled on each other, just everywhere. If the housing is the need, we're going to have to meet it. And when those were brought back to the community, they said, no, we don't want that. We want a community that's actually livable, where you can shop, where you can play, where you can have community gatherings, where we can be ourselves and be safe. We don't want just housing. We have those, cluster housings, government housings, housing around the BIA, around schools. We want an actual livable community. And so this is what was created, a place that has a multi-use capacity for our community members. This is our video that just talks more about our work. I welcome you to watch it. It's on our website. So I just invite you to take some time to look at that. But I'd just like to share images of where we're at. We're done with phase one of the construction of our 34 acres. There's more to come. We have our second round of infrastructure to do. We have high energy sovereignty goals. We've moved beyond net zero and really have focused on how we are going to become sovereign as far as our energy production so that we're not taking more than we're putting back. The creation of a wetland system to address our waste issues, how we're going to store water so that, water is a limited resource. As much as people don't want to admit that, it is limited. And so how are we being good stewards of the resources that we are using? Again, just falling in line with who we are, our ideology as Lakota people. How are we restoring the balance in our communities and in our relationships? And so, when I talked about healing earlier, that liberation starts with healing, it also involves healing our physical spaces. What we're doing here at Thunder Valley is really setting a new standard for what our community can expect. No longer are we satisfied with accepting subpar or substandard or just survival. We are tired of just surviving. We want to thrive. We want the highest technology. We want the best and most sustainable buildings and homes that are safe, that can withstand 90-mile-per-hour winds, that can provide energy-efficient housing and low electricity bills. How do we do that in one of the most impoverished places in the world, right? So that's just a part of our vision at Thunder Valley, is being energy sovereign and providing those types of resources for community members. So every building we have, every rooftop, from our offices to our homes to our community center and bunkhouse, has solar currently. We've done a renewable energy feasibility study to determine other types of renewable energy that we can have on site to support our energy sovereignty work, looking into biomass energy production as well, some wind energy exploration. So, the possibilities are really endless when you're thinking about the amount of space that we have on the reservation. This is our community center. We host community gatherings. It's available to community to rent. We've had a wedding in there, birthday parties, a large number of activities available for community. That's not a school or a church. Right now, the only option for community members are rent the gym at the school or the hall at the church. And so this is a separate space that community have access to. And then the bunkhouse, we get a lot of visitors in the summer. It's just a space that they can rent so that they can be right there immersed in our community. And then we have a 12-unit apartment building, that's the blue building, that's available as well. We try to normalize the use of our Lakota language, so all the street signs are written in Lakota so that our children grow up seeing the language everywhere and all around them. We have, oh my God, okay. Just another view of ongoing work in our community. And I always like to share this slide because it really speaks to our advocacy for our community members, for one, and making sure we're reflecting community voice, but two, our advocacy for our lifeways itself, and that any work that we do is respectful to our identity as Lakota people. A lot of times in Indian country, our tribal communities, we have outside partners that do a lot of the work, whether it's architectural design, the actual construction and building. It's done by outside entities and people. And so they drop in and to do this, and it's all needed, right? These partnerships are all necessary. But what's the level of cultural competency that they bring to this work? And we've really put that to task with many of our partners. And so when we wanted to design a playground, we again engaged our community. We talked to our young people, talked to the kids, asked them what they wanted to see. How did they want this playground to make them feel? What did they want to be able to do? So we gathered all of that information and we gave it to the engineering firm. And we said, make sure that it's culturally in tuned with who we are as community members. And they brought back a playground that had a star quilt pattern and a medicine wheel on the ground. If you Googled stereotypical Native images, you'll get a star quilt pattern and a medicine wheel. And we said, you have to do better. You've been working in Indian country for decades. You proclaim it on your website as being culturally competent, and this is the best you can come up with. They didn't let me in that conversation because I would not say it very nice. So others in our organization had that conversation and said, here are some books, some reading, some resources. You can educate yourself. And they're all at the library in Rapid City. So here's your list, here's your homework. Go and do it and come back with an iteration that is more reflective of what we gave you. So, after a series of those kinds of conversations, this is what they designed, and we're very proud of it. There's 2 stories that are captured in this design, and it's the story of the Great Race around the Black Hills, which brought together all living beings, the bison, the winged, the four-legged, and then humans, and it was a race for basically dominance. And there's a whole teaching that's around there, and the red racetrack signifies the blood of all of those that were racing. And so that story is woven into the design of the space. And then each of the play structures will represent a sacred site. There are 7 sacred sites in the Black Hills. The entire Black Hills is sacred to us, but there are 7 specific sites that we visit at different times of the year according to a spiritual calendar, and there are medicines that we gather and harvest at specific times too. And so each of these play structures represents one of those. And in addition to that, there will be an audio component where our young people and family members can hear the teaching of that site in Lakota and English. So they're hearing the language, they're learning the teachings, they're seeing the physical spaces, because sometimes it's hard for our families to travel to the Black Hills to access our own spiritual sites. So being able to provide this integration of play and recreation and family bonding and relationship building along with history and teachings and knowledge is really remarkable and beautiful. So we finished phase 1. We have some more to do. There's a rubberized surface. A lot of fundraising has to go into developing these kinds of spaces, but our community is worth it, and our children are worth it, and they deserve spaces like this that are intentional and beautiful and have the best things that they see when they go off reservation. So like I said before, we're setting a new standard. We're not accepting the leftovers anymore. We want our children to feel loved and to have that love reflected in the physical spaces that are designed for them. As I round out this conversation, I just want to reiterate the importance of the work that community can do together, collectively. We focus a lot on narrative shifting, being the tellers of our own stories in our communities. We actually host an annual media summit every fall, and this year we're combining our food summit, our food sovereignty summit, with our media summit and language violation into one liberation summit in November. I'll be happy to share the information, because it's not only for Indigenous community members, it's for non-Indigenous allies too, to be a part of that conversation around how do we share the stories in respectful ways about our Indigenous communities and about the important work that's happening in our communities. And so, I think about all of the work that has come before us. These are just images of some of the work. This is one of our Montessori sites, our Montessori classrooms, the spaces that we create for our children. One of our guides and a few of the children doing work, doing different lessons and throughout the day. Some youth visiting our demonstration farm and our egg layers. I made a fool of myself earlier talking about when we transitioned the chickens out. I was like, when they stop laying so many eggs. Anyways, I had to call our director and say, what wording am I looking for? So we get a lot of youth groups that come through to tour our demonstration farm. That's exactly the idea, that our community members will learn how to set up these systems so that they can have their own food systems. Our housing and home ownership team reaching out to do some financial literacy with youth, and in this picture particularly. That's the inside of our community center. We actually had a local artist design those soundboards to make it more cultural feeling. Our regional equity initiative, we do a lot of advocacy work, as I mentioned. This is actually Senator Red Dawn Foster, and that's former Senator for North Dakota, Ruth Buffalo. We are speaking at the Water Summit that takes place annually in Rapid City every August. So I don't like that picture, but it's included. Just a lot of our youth doing summer activities. our workforce development crew, replacing a roof on one of our offices. Social enterprise really works with local aspiring entrepreneurs and launching their own independent businesses. So this was the launch of a construction company from some of our participants in our business development. And just some staff going on a tour of a historical site with one of our Lifeways and Wellness Equity team members, talking about the importance and historical significance of different places. As I conclude, I always like to talk about, I always get asked, how can we help? How can we be of more support to Indigenous peoples in general, to Thunder Valley? So I have a list for you. And the first thing that I always recommend, no matter the audience, is to know Indigenous history of Turtle Island, that's North America and Central America. And more specifically, to know the history of the land you occupy. I think it's really important to recognize the land as living and that it has its own story that you should know. Not center people in that learning, but really recognize the land as its own entity that deserves to have its story told. We were at a convening once, and a Oneida elder stood up and said, because they were talking about creative placemaking, how do you make space and all these things, and he said, it's not about place making, it's about place knowing. And so that really stopped people in their tracks to say that's right? It's not, we can't center ourselves in our relationship with the land. We have to acknowledge that it has its own right to be here. And so learning that history, no matter how hard or difficult it may be, that's the only way forward in true healing. Because non-Indigenous people as well, white people, have to heal from colonization too. It's been traumatic across the board for everyone, regardless of race. And to be able to have the shared understanding of what that history looks like, especially for this land, is so important to our collective healing. Treaties and land back as a part of that history. You're going to learn about treaties, what that means, what's the legal standing of them, what does that mean for territories and boundaries, what has been the jurisprudence leading up to today regarding these treaties, and what does that mean going forward? If we were to honor and recognize treaties, what does that actually mean for the people living on those lands and those territories? And what is this land back movement all about? It's not something new. It's something that we've been fighting for since the point of colonization, generation after generation after generation. But there are some really tangible examples of how land back is happening, even in the smallest ways. Along the coast, I've heard of nonprofit organizations researching the history of their land titles, their deeds, and then signing over their deeds and their titles to Indigenous organizations or the Indigenous nations that are there that may have a smaller land base. It's that easy. It's signing over a land deed and then paying lease and rent to those Indigenous groups to help support the work that they're doing. You have a lot of public institutions, even of higher learning, that are land grant institutions that were taken as a part of a land theft of Indigenous people. I would invite them to learn the history of their institutions and how they're reckoning with that past, to make to promote justice, I would say. Support Indigenous data sovereignty. This is a new movement. It really started in New Zealand with the Maoris around language data sovereignty. A lot of times in our communities, the relationship with non-Indigenous people is very extractive. You come, you study us, you learn from us, you get the information, and then you take it and you research it and you package it and then you sell it back to us. That's what happened with our language. You're forbidden from speaking it. We will beat you if you speak it. We're outlawing it from being spoken, but we're studying it in the meantime. We're collecting it in the meantime. And now, fast forward to this era, and we're going to sell it back to you so that you don't lose it, even though we tried to do that very thing in all of that time period. And so we have a big movement growing in and amongst our communities on how do we protect our teachings, our language, our lifeways, our knowledge from being appropriated, from being stolen. You see a lot of this with Lakota and Dakota lifeways. You have sun dances happening in Germany. Those kinds of things. That's appropriation. Smudge kits that you see at Urban Outfitters, that's appropriation. those are things that you do not do. Saying, I found my tribe. That's appropriation from a very distinct political identity that we carry as Indigenous people. Good or bad, we have that identity because that was forced on us. And so that's how we have to maneuver through this life. But so flippantly saying, I found my tribe or bride tribe is so disrespectful to the struggle that we have had to endure by having that designation as a tribal peoples. Things like that, like things you might not think, let's powwow, let's have a meeting and powwow. No, that's a very distinct cultural activity for Indigenous people that carry a lot of meaning in the different dances and songs that are shared in that time and space. So just being conscious about that and how that's appropriation and theft is really important. Looking at museums, having a conversation earlier today. All of the artifacts that are in museums that are Indigenous, where did they come from? How did they get there? Someone's personal collection? How did it end up in their personal collection? Probably stolen. Stolen from battlefields when massacres happen and now end up in a museum somewhere. Those should be returned to the families, to the communities that they came from. That goes along with changing the narrative, really being conscious about how we tell the story of Indigenous communities and of Indigenous peoples, making sure that it's forward-thinking, that it's solution-based, and that it's positive, rather than always telling the stories of hopelessness and despair, which you often see in the media. It's one of the reasons why we started the Media Summit, is to invite media and journalists and everybody involved in that sector to come in to learn and engage in conversation on how do we tell our stories differently and more appropriately. And then the last one, and you're seeing a lot of that too right now in mainstream media with the shows like Reservation Dogs on FX, Killers of the Flower Moon, right? Lily Gladstone just won an award for her performance in there, telling that important story about the oil and the Osage people. So you're seeing a shift in the tide a bit, but I think it's going to take a lot more advocacy, especially in the world of like Hollywood and more mainstream media, to really start to see a shift in that mentality. And then the last one I have here is to support Indigenous-led organizations and develop those relationships. So one of our board members and a founder actually once shared that to give money is important. Of course, it's needed, it's necessary. Actually, less than a half of 1% of all of philanthropic dollars go to Indigenous-led organizations in all of philanthropy. And you think about the fourth world conditions that exist on every reservation, and we ask, why is that? How can that be? And the statistics for South Dakota giving are even worse. None of our support comes from South Dakota foundations. Not for a lack of trying. It's just not a priority to give to Indigenous-led efforts. But that's one thing. To give money, to give financial support is important, it's necessary, but that's giving from your mind. What's even more important to us, to our communities, is to give from your heart. And how do you do that? You make a connection to our community. You make a connection to our people. You come and you visit, because that spirit, the spirit of our work, of the place, of the physical space that we're building, it carries a spirit. There's a connection to it. You can feel that energy when you're there, that hopefulness, that positivity. And it comes to life and it inspires something in you. So by coming and taking the time to visit and to learn with us and alongside us, not about us, with us and alongside us, is a sure way to deepen that connection and to be life-changing, to be transformational in your life and your own journey for healing and education and knowledge. So I encourage each of you to do that. You know, you're a part of an organization, community. You want to be lifelong learners. It's challenging work. As my mom always tells me, doing this kind of community work is going to be hard because it's spiritual work. But it's something that, you know, we take head on because it's our responsibility. As future ancestors, it's our responsibility to carry that legacy forward for the next generation. We have to love the next generation as much as the previous generations loved us, to ensure that 150 years from now, 200 years from now, we have Lakota people still living and thriving and speaking our language and being who we are as Lakota people. It is incumbent upon us to carry that forward. So with that, I thank you again for welcoming me. Today has been really wonderful, and I think there's time for a half of a question. Just kidding. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatewin, very much. Let's have how about a question and a half rather than a half a question?
Okay.
Joan, you'll need to have the mic so that people online can hear.
What is your the unemployment rate with the Pine Ridge Reservation? It's pretty high, but compared to your Thunder Village there, and what are you doing to get them into more jobs?
By them, who do you mean?
The people living in your community, are they the families?
So we have a multitude of individuals that live there in the single-family homes. So in the development, you would see the 21 single-family homes have, they're in circles of 7. And that is to reflect our traditional encampments. As Ocheti Shankowi, the 7 council fires that I mentioned, each nation or each group within that nation had a specific area that they sat in. This used to be the Tatewin, the Tatewin were at the place of honor. But we designed it that way to reflect that traditional encampment structure. And so these are all for purchase, for standard mortgages. So we have 11 families right now that live in them. Different mortgage options that they did. Debbie is actually one of the homeowners. She was our first veterans loan. She's a veteran, served in the Marine Corps. So some of our staff members have bought homes there. Other community members that work outside of Thunder Valley have lived there. In our apartment building, you know, a variety of individuals, not all of them work at Thunder Valley. And so, I mean, we're one of the largest private employers, as I mentioned, on the reservation. Employment rates are extremely high. I'm not sure of the most recent statistic, but our primary effort to address that is our workforce development program. How are we training and creating a waterway of new young people to be a part of the workforce for the reservation?
Other questions? Charlotte?
Yes, I'm curious. You have the chickens. Can you tell me anything about horses on your land?
Sure. So, actually, a part of our workforce development, I should have included that picture, I took it out, but we do equine therapy. So our workforce development is a little different than your standard career development programs because it's really holistic development. They do a lot around social emotional development. They create educational plans. They do soft skill development and then a trade. So right now it's construction. But as a part of their social emotional work, they do talking circles weekly. They do equine therapy. And so we have a lot of partnerships with community members. And in that particular instance, there's a community member that will take the cohort to his ranch and allow them to have that interaction with the horses. And so, you know, that horse culture is very prominent amongst our people. It came a little later, right, when horses were introduced to us, but very good horsemen, traditionally or historically. You have the Indian relays. I don't know if you've seen those on social media. Indian relays are really gaining a lot of popularity. Just showing off the horsemanship of our young people is really remarkable to see. But definitely horses everywhere across our community. We don't have any on site just yet, but as we acquire, we have land acquisition strategy for different spaces across the reservation. Having that a part of our school that we're designing is really important.
One more question. Oh, we've got 3, so let's see.
You mentioned trying to overcome historical trauma. What does that look like and how is that achieved?
I think there are so many people trying to figure that out. So this is one way. that we've found that's effective is addressing, like I mentioned, through the 8 initiatives. What they're really targeting is our Indigenous determinants of health. Taking it beyond, expanding it beyond social determinants of health. You see a lot of work in communities will say we're improving social determinants, right, health outcomes. But what we're doing is really taking a look at how does racism impact health outcomes, how does access to our language improve health outcomes, and really trying to get a bigger picture of all of these efforts that we're doing across these initiatives. Which areas of health are they specifically targeting and helping to improve? And so, I mean, that's one strategic way to do it, is to really address those different layers and levels of health and wellness. But at a more fundamental level, at a deeper level, it starts with our spirituality. It starts with a connection to those beliefs, those spiritual laws, those ceremonies, the teachings that go with them, our spiritual calendar that we live by. There's some elders in our community that created this Lakota life course curriculum. So we have 4 stages of our life, right, that go in a circle from the womb until, 5 or 6, and then young, when you become a adolescent, go through your rites of passage, and then a young adult, and then an elder, right? So what does that Lakota life course look like without the interruptions of trauma along that cycle, along that circle? And how do we heal that? You hear that phrase a lot in Indian country, mending the sacred hoop. That's what they're talking about. In that traditional life course, there are certain things, there are certain milestones that we should reach as Lakota people. We're given a name at birth. We're given a name as we go through our puberty ceremonies, as we become adults and we've accomplished things for our people, and as we become elders, right? We're supposed to have 4 names throughout our life cycle. And you earn those in various ways. Reclaiming those teachings, reclaiming the meaning behind all of those ceremonies is a sure path forward in healing. It has to be. It's what has ensured that we're here today. And so rooting our work in the tree, like I showed you, the lifeways, how are we reaching more of our community members and connecting them to that healing? Because if we have more people in our jails than we do in our community, that's not okay. That we're not doing enough. So that's really the challenge that I put forth to our staff, is how are we reaching the most vulnerable in our community? How are we reaching those on the periphery, the forgotten, the lost? Because how are we being good relatives if we continue in this way and forget about them and leave them behind? And so really testing ourselves to say, how good of a relative are we? How good of an ancestor are we being to reach those that need that healing the most? And the healing has to start with a reconnection to our spirituality and our faith.
How about one more question? Lyle, you got a chance to ask questions earlier, so, and you, yes. Lyle, I think you've asked 3 or 4, so. There we go.
Tatewin, did I say that correctly?
Tatewin.
Tatewin. Do you guys know what that means? Has she told you? Great woman, right? Similar?
Wind. Tate is wind.
Tatewin and
Yeah.
woman.
Mhm.
What
Yeah.
we as women.
Yeah.
And you truly are. You are a great woman and
Thank you.
a leader for everybody. Anyway, Kola, friend, is that correct? Kola?
Kola.
Yeah, friend. Okay, friend. Well, anyway, we had the opportunity to be out the tribe. Where is the location of from Pine Ridge, your village?
We're almost central in the Pine Ridge Reservation. So
From the
about
city of Pine Ridge.
40 miles northeast.
Okay,
Pine Ridge.
and had the opportunity to work with Tom Daschle and leaders back for the Wagner Sioux Tribe. We got $1 million for the tribe, but it seems like they get the money and they don't do what you guys want, and then it falls in disrepair. The housing and everything. My questions to you is how to keep from, once they spend the money and people give their money, to keep from housing and all that to falling in disrepair. Number 2, the gnome issue. How do we need to address that? I think she's been a real jerk to you guys now and in the past. Served with Keller, Dick Hagan. Third question is the nursing homes. Did you ever get that off the ground? We used to vote for that every year. That was one of Dick Hagan's.
We do. Yeah, we have a tribal nursing home that's actually located in White Clay.
And it's done now. It's complete.
It's in operation.
In Nebraska, though.
Yep.
So the South Dakota funding never came through for that then?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't think so. Okay. And then the last thing, fun memory, Czech Days in Pierre and the Native American Days. And the Czech queens and the native princesses and the drummers, Van Norman and his drumming crew, we'd all be in the Capitol. The Czechs, they'd be dancing the Czech stuff, and we'd be going around in the circle with the native stuff, and it was just a wonderful memory of two groups getting together, and it's been some lifetime memories. And on the sidelight, it drove Janko nuts because he couldn't have his smoke in his illicit governor's office because he wasn't supposed to smoke in there. But that was a wonderful memory, and if we can do that, you know, with the tribes, all the different people getting together and working with you guys and working with everybody to bring normalization and peace and not all this hatred and hate mongering together. So anyway, those are the three questions, and then the last, I have a cousin that's married to a direct descendant of Sitting Bull, Nebraska, and a cousin married to a native tribal member from the Wagner Reservation, or the Yankton Sioux in Wagner. They both families got off the reservation, and they've been a tremendous success. And they've parlayed that, have expressed to me and others that if we would just dismantle the reservation system and let the natives disperse into the communities and quit discriminating against them, if that would be a solution or not. And that's my final question. And the tribal you addressed, and then a gnome, and what was the third one? Whatever. But anyway, I just wanted to compliment you.
You're supposed to get one question.
Yeah, I know. Well, I've learned with the Governor Janko, he talked for 2 hours on one question, so I got to get them all. But I want to thank you for what you're trying to do. You've turned a lot of heads and made a difference in a lot of people's lives.
Thank you. I
On the
appreciate
reservation.
that. So first, if you can answer how we can stop the federal government from doing that with resources, I'm sure that would be a good solution for it. I mean, because what the tribal governments are now are facsimiles of the federal government, poor facsimiles. It was through the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934 that these IRA governments were established, totally ineffective and contravened anything that was around traditional tribal governance. So they've never been effective for our people. So it doesn't surprise me when there's complaints and issues, even within our own community, about the structure and the system itself, the bureaucracy that tribal governments are, because they model the federal government. And so when we can answer that question on how we transform all levels of government so they're not bureaucratic and waste resources, we'll all be better for it. The second thing around Christine.
Well, then the buildings, they build this stuff you don't necessarily want, but then it deteriorates. You know, the apartments, the houses, the different things, there's no follow through to keep it up. And that's both a native and a white problem. But how do you solve that?
I mean, well, give the money to Thunder Valley. Just kidding. I think involving community, grassroots community members at those levels of infrastructure, of development, of maintenance is really important. A reliance on any government to do the work of the community is never a successful model. And so really incorporating and bringing in community efforts is important, I think, in sustaining the long-term effectiveness of solutions. Because it's from the people. The people have buy-in, people believe in it, because it reflects what they want to see in the community. As for Christy Nome, I'm not really sure how to answer that. I don't expend much energy into that political conversation just because there's so much beautiful work that's happening in our community in real time. I'm absolutely a proponent of our tribal sovereignty, obviously. I upheld the laws of the Oglala Sioux Tribal Nation as the Attorney General. So first and foremost, I'll always advocate for our sovereignty and our right to assert that sovereignty at any given time, regardless of the government actor on the other side. And so, you know, supporting our tribal officials when they make that determination of when our tribal sovereignty needs to be asserted. I'll always be a supporter of our tribal sovereignty and our freedom as independent sovereign nations. And so with that, what was the other one? The last one? No, I said
Tribal, how long has that tribal nursing home been running?
For many years, actually. It started back even before I left the Attorney General's office in 2017, but they've had a full capacity ever since. It's run very well from what I know, and a lot of families are really appreciative that it's there because the relatives are closer. When I was Attorney General, we would take guardianship of individuals that were spread all across the state and into other states, and families would never get to see them. And so being able to have a local place for our relatives to be is really important. And our healing community will be right across the road, so hopefully bring more family and visitors closer together.
And we do have one more question, and then we'll be done, I promise.
First of all, thank you for all of your work and efforts. It's a beautiful project. But are there any efforts to replicate this on other reservations?
Great question, and yes, we have a lot of conversations with different communities, Standing Rock, Rosebud, that are interested, Eagle Butte, Cheyenne River, want to know our approach, how we've found success, some of the things we've learned, and we're always willing to share our story, the things we learned, especially things to avoid, because we've had our ups and our downs, and we have to walk with humility and recognize when we've made mistakes and things we could have done differently so that we don't make those same mistakes going forward, but always happy to share our approach. And it can't be a one-size-fits-all because it has to be unique to that community, right? This started because it was a reflection of what the community said. So the most fundamental thing we can advise and encourage other groups to do is to talk to your community and figure out what's important. Here's a structure and a model to do, but what's at the heart of that work has to come from the community voice. And you have to listen. Right? Our communities are untrusting because we're used to government consultations where they come in and they hear everything and they do these listening sessions and then they go back to Washington or they go back to Pierre and nothing happens. And so you can't be that. You can't be that kind of advocate in your community. You have to mean what you say and do what you tell your community you're going to do in order to rebuild that trust and respect within your own community. That's what we really try hard to do at Thunder Valley. And like I said, we're always happy to share. We don't appreciate it so much when people steal our ideas. I mean, I'm a lawyer, so I do have strong objections to intellectual property theft. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. There's so much work to be done. If that has to happen and it's going to benefit some of our community members somewhere, so be it. Just as long as there's positive movement happening, there's positive work happening, and our community benefits, then that's all that matters.
Tate, we thank you for coming to Dakota Wesleyan. We're very glad you came, and everybody needs to grab a cookie on the way out. I ordered cookies for 50 people, and we didn't quite get 50. So please go take a handful of cookies home with you, and thank you again, Tatewin. This has been wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you all.